Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Tuesday, January 17, 2023 Placerville Planning Commission regular meeting, the first meeting of the new year. If you'd all join me in a call to order and rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And thank you, Commissioner, for calling me out on the time. Can we have the roll, please?
Good evening, Commissioners. Vice Chair Friend.
Here.
Commissioner Keeney.
Here.
Commissioner Lepper.
Here.
Commissioner List.
Here.
Okay. We have a quorum. Closed session report. I don't believe we have closed session this evening, so
We have
no
none.
report. I'll entertain a motion for adoption of the agenda.
Second.
Motion and second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Great. Consent calendar, we have the minutes from the December 6th meeting. Any comments, corrections to the minutes? Members of the audience, anyone have comments or corrections to the minutes? Chair will entertain a motion to adopt.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, the minutes are
Abstain, I was not here.
one abstention. Thank you. The chair approves. No items are pulled from the consent calendar. Number 7, items of interest to the public comment, non-agenda items. This portion of the meeting is reserved for individuals of the community to come and speak before the commission. You may not address an item that is already on our agenda. Your time will be limited to 3 minutes. No personal attacks will be tolerated. Is anyone in the audience wish to address the commission this evening? Be kind enough to state your name for the record, please.
Michael Drobish, City of Placerville,
Good to see you, Michael.
resident. Just a question on procedure with 4 members. If it's a 2-2 vote, is that?
A motion would fail technically on a split vote. We
so
will
it would
need a
be in action?
majority in the affirmative.
Okay, because I was just wondering, another question for, maybe I'll address it, an item tonight.
However, I believe, and entertain the dialogue, should one member from the quorum have to leave and we wind up with a 2-1 vote, the 2-1 vote would then pass.
Okay, and what if 1 or 2 people abstained from?
You'd need a majority of the quorum to pass.
Okay, very good, thank you.
That's my understanding, and if staff has a correction, my rudimentary understanding of Robert's rules.
You have it correct, Vice Chair Friend.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, good. Anyone else in the audience wish to address the commission this evening? All right, then we'll close out item 7, move on to written communications. Any written communications, Mr. Rivas?
No, we have none.
Okay, fantastic. Moving right through. Presentations and educational workshop sessions. I do not believe we have any this evening.
We have none.
Okay, then let's get on to the meat of the business. It's going to be a riveting presentation on zoning changes, proposed zoning changes, accessory dwelling units, ADUs, and junior accessory dwelling units, JADUs, to comply with state requirements. Pierre, do you have the staff report?
Kristen Hunter will be giving the staff
Kristen.
report this evening.
Thank you, Ms. Hunter. Looking forward to your report. Thank you.
So a brief history, accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, have historically been referred to as granny flats and have been permitted in California since the 1980s. ADUs were originally created as a means to prevent the dislocation of family members and to allow for the care of aging parents by their children. Currently, ADUs are seen as a means of providing for affordable housing. In 2016, Governor Brown approved legislation regarding ADUs to significantly reduce conditions the city could apply to secondary units. In 2017, the city replaced regulations within the zoning ordinance regarding secondary dwelling units with regulations regarding ADUs to bring the code into compliance with state law. These changes to the zoning ordinance were considered by the Planning Commission and City Council in April of 2019, pursuant to Senate Bill 229 and Assembly Bill 494, which primarily addressed unit size, parking requirements, and setback requirements. Title 10 was updated following City Council approval on April 23, 2019. Zone Change 20-01 is a request by city staff to amend Title 10 of the City Code to comply with all state laws pertaining to ADUs and junior accessory dwelling units, or JADUs, as required by the Implementation Program C-2 of the 2021-2029 Housing Element Update. Zone Change 2001 was initiated with the adoption of the Resolution of Intent 19-04 by City Council in December 2019. The request before you this evening includes modifications pursuant to SB 13 and AB 68, 587, 670, 671, and 881, all enacted in 2019, Assembly Bill 3182, enacted in 2020, AB 345, enacted in 2021, and AB 2221 and SB 897, enacted in 2022. Staff completed a consistency review of Title 10 with relation to the 2019-2022 state legislation for ADUs and has identified necessary text amendment changes to bring the city's regulation into conformance with state law. Identified text amendments include those to the following sections. 10-1-4 definitions, which include additions and/or updating of ADU, JADU associated terms. 10-4-4 parking and loading, addition of language requiring no new stalls for ADUs or JADUs. Section 10-4-12 ADUs, where the existing section provided in attachment C of the staff report is repealed and replaced with a new section in conformance with city codes and all applicable state laws. And updates to Title 10, Chapter 5 zoning regulations to include JADUs, ADUs, guest quarters, and/or bungalow court. Staff recommends that the Planning Commission take the following action to approve Zone Change 20-01. Adopt as part of the public record the January 17th, 2023 staff report for Zone Change 20-01, and recommend that City Council find the draft text amendments to Title 10 of City Code under the Zone Change 20-01 are statutorily exempt from California Environmental Quality Act under Section 15282H of the CEQA guidelines and per Public Resource Code sections 21080.17 as the adoption of an ordinance regarding accessory dwelling units in a single-family or multifamily zone by a city to comply with Government Code sections 65852-15 and section 65852.2 is exempt from environmental review. And recommend that the City Council approve Zone Change 20-01 and amend Title 10 as described in Attachment A of the staff's January 17th, 2023 staff report.
Thank you for that rapid-fire reporting, Ms. Hunter. I appreciate it. Questions of staff by commissioners?
I just have a couple wording questions. but I think I'll
Microphone.
save that. Excuse me. I have a couple wording questions, but I'll save that till after the public comment.
Thank you. Any other commissioners? Could we talk a little bit about the parking recommendations? And for whatever reason, I don't find my notes immediately handy. But I recall in my reading of this that we were not going to require additional parking. If someone were to add an ADU or a JADU, there's no additional parking that might be required.
There is not, no.
And I'm concerned about that. We can talk about that a little bit later. I mean, that seems to be discretionary on the part. Is that discretionary on our part, or is the state dictated that we have no control over that?
It's a state-dictated requirement, assuming local transportation within a certain distance.
If it exists, then you can't require it. But if you're not within, you have to be within half a mile, right? Is that what it is? It's a half a mile, if I remember correctly? I know the state said that if a garage or a carport is converted, a garage or a carport is converted, and you lose that off-street parking, you cannot mandate that be replaced somehow. That part I remember reading. But it seems to me that as we increase the density, and theoretically, at a minimum, you could have an ADU, which are already allowed by right, correct? I mean, those are the granny flats. But then we have the JADU. I can see that all of a sudden now, and this is in the same parts as a single family home, right? boom, now you've added, and this can happen throughout the entire neighborhood, that now all of a sudden, you've created this demand on parking. And I realize that some places fall within the half mile. That's what I think was the parameter. If you fall within half mile of the El Dorado Transit, then we're covered. But otherwise, it would seem that there has to be some sort of ministerial review, because that's about the only review we get. So I don't know where we're at with that.
Well, there would always be a ministerial review because construction or the conversion of either interior space or of a garage, or if it's a new detached unit, does require a building permit. And with the building permit, there is both, of course, the building division is going to review it in accordance with the building code, but the planning division will review it in accordance with setback regulations, height regulations, size, and all of those components.
So, okay, so you'll have to look at if the public transportation exists within the half mile, that the project, the application, proposed project is covered within a half mile of El Dorado Transit, right? That'll be part of the ministerial review. And if not, then what would you do with regards to parking?
So I'm going to rely on Kristen. She's probably more in the weeds than I am.
Okay.
But I know there's differences between being a major transit versus just a transit like facility like a bus stop.
Right.
So I believe in the case of accessory dwelling units and ADUs, that is within half mile of any bus stop or transit facility. Am I correct in that, Kristen?
Yeah, I mean, in our staff report, we have that more than 1/2 of the city's residential areas are within the 1/2 mile walking distance to the.
So, I'm sorry, say that again, please?
Sorry, more than 1/2 of the city's residential areas are within the distance. And that the definition of public transit was revised. There's a scheduled transit no greater than every 15 minutes on
so
a
it
fixed
would-
route.
So it would seem to me it would be fairly straightforward to develop a map, right? That you could see, okay, well, this portion of the city is covered by the transit and this portion of the city is not. And so then those portions of the city that are covered by transit, it's a non-issue. So then my question would be, for those areas of the city that would not be covered by transit, what would we do about parking? What would be our position on parking then?
If they're outside the half mile, well then, if they're taking away parking, they would have to make up that parking.
Okay, all right, so that's going to be our position on that.
Yeah.
All right, and that can be done with strictly a map, I would think.
Yeah, the only situation, if I may, Vice Chair Friend, is in regards to multifamily. I just want to point that out because we had gone round and round. And it's not very clear in the state legislature, but usually in apartment complexes, you have designated parking stalls for the tenants, and then sometimes you have a certain area that's set aside for guests. And so if a apartment complex were to avail themselves to creating an accessory dwelling unit and consume any parking, we would require that parking be made up somehow.
Okay. Another question I have deals with, and if any of the commissioners come up with questions, I'm happy to yield.
Just to cite what you were talking about, the parking, there is a reference to it on page 16 of the state thing that says that the local agency can find specific findings that are based on specific site or regional topographical or fire and life safety conditions. So I would imagine if we had a really serious issue about where parking would end up, that could be an area that we could explore utilizing with specific findings by the local agency. So I think there is a little bit of
Wiggle room.
oversight if something is causing life and safety or topographic, or is limited topographically.
Yeah, if I could comment briefly on that. That's a very good observation because I could see the situation where in the city of Placerville you may have some very substandard narrow roads where you either have parking only on one side or no parking on the roadway at all. In those circumstances, we could make the special finding and require on-site parking.
And I see the fire representative right here is nodding in affirmative, yeah. We have a lot of those at the city. There was, we have the efficiency kitchen, right? And I recall the efficiency kitchen description relative to the JADU, right? And in there it talks about the appliances that are needed for the kitchen. And I believe it's a microwave and a heating plate and one other. Doesn't have to be a built-in range or anything complicated like that. Is the efficiency kitchen the same for? Is the kitchen issue the same for a JADU as an ADU, or does an ADU have different kitchen requirements?
There are different kitchen requirements. It requires a full kitchen as defined by the California Building Code. So it has a specific counter space. I think it's 30 inches for preparation. You have to have a fridge no less than 10 cubic feet, and an oven and an oven and a cooktop or a range
Okay.
and a sink.
If I could just piggyback on Ms. Hunter, the kitchen is defined in the city code. So, for example, any dwelling unit is required to have what you would just categorize as a full kitchen, containing a place. You got to have a place to eat, to prepare, to clean, and then to cook, including the range or the top. Efficiency kitchen came into being when we were considering our short-term rental ordinance
Right,
in
and
the
that-
commercial zone. So in those zones, if you're applying for a short-term rental, you could avail yourselves to having a what's called an efficiency kitchen. So as long as you have the space to prepare the food, cleaning, meaning a sink, to eat, you have to have a place where you can sit down and eat that food. And then the cook, it could be like a hot plate or a microwave or that kind of a thing. So you don't have to have the full built-in range. And so that would be the efficiency kitchen. And then the junior ADU can have an efficiency kitchen where an accessory dwelling unit is a full dwelling unit and it must have the full kitchen.
Okay. And that's what triggered my thinking on that, because I remember we kind of went round and round on that. What constituted the quote-unquote kitchen? And then,
Can I ask a follow-up question on that?
You may,
Thank you. Because I had a question about the kitchen too, just to make sure that we were really solid on that definition and how to back up for it. I knew it wasn't defined in our words, but I figured it would be referenced in the code. But on that same one, I had a question on the JADUs on that page 10D. It doesn't mention a sink. Is a sink required in a JADU?
Yes.
Yes, okay. It just doesn't need to be mentioned specifically in there.
And as long as efficiency kitchen is mentioned there, a kitchen always must have a sink. You have
Okay.
to be able to wash your hands and wash the food.
Okay, great, yeah.
Absolutely.
Because it mentions the appliances for cooking and it mentions the food preparation, and I just wasn't sure if we wanted to incorporate that specific reference there or not. Just a suggestion.
and we may get to language changes later, and I'm going to bring
Yeah,
up one
we can
more.
certainly add the sink just for clarity.
Okay.
It just kind of hit me that it wasn't there.
Doesn't have to have a garbage disposal.
No.
Okay. I'm envisioning Kramer with his garbage disposal in his shower for some reason. Then the last question I have, and this may come up under your language changes, I read in here, and I can't remember if it's the state document or in our documents, it talks about in a JADU, they do not necessarily have to have a bathroom in the JADU, but they must have otherwise have access to a bathroom in the house, right? It seems to me, just devil's advocate, that the language should read, it has to be conditioned, that the owner it has to be conditioned so that person would have access to that bathroom, right? If they don't have a bathroom, it's got to be written in here that within conditions as set forth by the occupant of the main structure, that the person in the JADU has access to the bathroom. I don't know why I got this vision. The way things are today, things are just so crazy and litigious, and it can be a really difficult situation. Hey, you can't use it between the hours of, what I'm saying? And I realize it's kind of comical, but maybe we get the language changes, we might deal with that? Because it kind of struck me as something that could be a problem.
Our brains were very much working on the same
Okay.
thing. Because
Yeah, if
I
I could-
noticed in E, it said may include a full bathroom, or they may use a full bathroom
Right.
inside. And I thought that needed some
They must be
clarity
able,
that
if it doesn't, they
That's
must.
the way the government code reads on page 24 of
May.
the handout. That's the
Yeah,
definition.
well, great, and so they're,
Yeah.
they're deficient in their clarity, we won't be.
Vice Chair Friend, that is a very, very good question. When the junior ADUs first came out from the state, and I believe it was still draft language at the time, the state was looking at allowing for the sharing of the kitchen,
Right.
and it had to have its own bathroom, and then they changed it so
Right.
that a junior ADU doesn't have to have its own bath, but it has to have its own kitchen. And staff would agree with you, when someone develops an ADU, we actually require the owner to enter into a notice of restriction. That would be the instrument where we could provide that language that they must provide interior access to the bathroom, to that tenant.
And you might have something that says reasonable accommodation, right? Because they're gonna have to, they might decide, okay, what's between the hours of this and that, or, you know, I don't know how that would work, but it has to be a reasonable accommodation. They have to accommodate them somehow.
I think I think they would accommodate them 24/7.
Okay.
If somebody's sick or whatever and they have to use that
Yeah.
bathroom, they have to use that bathroom. But I think
Yeah.
that's a very good observation, and we will look into that. Because there has to be that connection between the junior ADU and the main dwelling, and then the junior ADU, and Kristen, correct me if I'm wrong, that it has to have access also to the exterior,
And to
its own
Commissioner-
entrance.
And to Commissioner Keeney's point, I don't believe that there's anything in the law that restricts us from being more precise or specific on terms, so long as we're not doing anything that would restrict or otherwise prevent the development of the ADUs or the JADUs. As long as we're allowing them to happen, we can still be very precise about other things if they're not specifically mentioned in the statute or the statute's unclear.
Yes, staff would agree with that.
Okay. All right, that's all of my bloviating. Go ahead and open, if no other questions for Commissioner List, go ahead.
On page 7, it says fire sprinklers. Fire sprinklers shall not be required in an ADU if they are not required in the primary dwelling unit. Now, right now, if I'm not mistaken, if you do a major remodel on a house, you have to upgrade with sprinklers. Is that correct?
You know, offhand, and maybe the fire chief can answer that better than I can. I don't know what the threshold is on a major remodel or the size of an addition to an existing dwelling unit that would trigger sprinklering.
This is when you wish you had your fire prevention pros here with you. But there is a provision, and I'm not sure on the exact square footage, that if you added it to a residence, that addition could be required to be sprinklered, but I do not believe that would retro across to the rest of the main dwelling that was pre-existing. That would be pre-existing non-conforming.
So my point is that if your house doesn't have a fire suppression system and you do an ADU, then you would not have to do it.
That's correct.
So that's an exemption for new construction from the fire, because all new
No.
construction in the state has to have
Yes.
sprinklers now?
Yes.
Sorry. I would
ahead.
just like to add that there is on page 23 of the handbook some language that says if the primary dwelling recently underwent significant alteration and is now required to have fire sprinklers, any ADU created after that alteration must. So just wanted to add that in.
So I guess my question would be, new ADUs, new structures, let's say you have an old house on the lot, but you're going to build a new ADU. Is that ADU exempt then from the fire sprinklers?
I think so.
That new construction is exempt.
If the primary dwelling unit does not have sprinklers, then you don't have to sprinkler the ADU.
Okay. All right. We didn't write the law, did we? Any other questions for staff by commissioners?
I have a couple.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
On page 6 of attachment A, on bullet point 2 toward the top of the page, all interior ADUs must be converted from non-livable space. What does that mean?
Storage, anything not habitable. So garage, storage.
So we don't define livable space. We have habitable space, and we have living area. And so I was wondering, I'm not comfortable with that, bringing in a new definition. I just want to be consistent with what we have under our definition, so that in a few years when we go back. So to stay consistent with the intent of bullet point 2, which option, or could we consider an option such as ADUs must be converted from space not considered living area as defined in our zoning ordinance, or would it be better to say ADUs must be converted from non-habitable space? Do either one of those get this point across while using the definitions that we've already established in the zoning ordinance?
Sorry, our staff is just going to consult for just a second.
Yeah, and along those lines, if on that same page, going down below, it says, if the ADU is created as a result of conversion of existing and legally permitted garage area or habitable living space,
Yes.
all interior ADUs must be converted from non-livable space. So
Non-habitable.
that seems to be in agreement conflict. Do you follow what I'm saying?
In the construction industry, it's what's the term? Conditioned space or non-conditioned space.
But
That would
in
be-
our, since we're rewriting or revisiting our regulations, I just want to be consistent with what we have already defined. And one of the things that this does is add on, let's see, now I'm lost my place here. We've got dwelling unit, habitable area is defined in the new ordinance, but we don't have a definition of we don't have our definition of that. So I hesitate to bring in new terms that then are unclear.
Yeah, but my point with that is that the people that would be using this would understand that term. Okay? If you go to a contractor and ask a contractor what conditioned space is, they would understand that.
Well, that's good, but I want
And we're
this to
writing
be
it for-
consistent within our own ordinance. I want to refer to things that we've defined. We could pick a definition. We could add conditioned space, but we haven't in this ordinance. We have a list of definitions, and
Yeah, Vice Chair Friend, I think staff could hopefully assist. I think staff would agree that the term non-livable space, it really should read non-habitable space. And if you want to add the term, I think I like the term that Commissioner List used, and that's unconditioned space. Because basically we're relying on the building code, and we don't want to throw in building code definitions into the zoning code, because that's what we're relying on. Because as Commissioner List points out, everyone really knows what unconditioned non-habitable space is. And it's interesting, the state was very particular when it came to multifamily units that are afforded the ability to have up to 2 ADUs, and then they can have a third ADU that's interior. So they could have 2 detached ADUs on the lot that has a existing multifamily. But with respect to the one on the interior, they were very careful to craft the language such that a multifamily structure can only convert non-habitable unconditioned space, like a closet, a storage area, something like that. They couldn't carve out, say, Sometimes a larger multifamily will have a facility that the tenants can rent to have parties or that kind of a thing, or other spaces that are for the use by the tenant. They can't carve those out and make it into ADU. It's for basically unutilized, unconditioned, uninhabitable space.
So again,
But those are building terms.
continuing on attachment A, page 6, because my attention was brought to it. If we look at the very last sentence on E2, okay, it says, all interior ADUs must be converted from, we're going to say non-habitable space, right? That's what it says. But then if I go down to F2, it says an ADU that is created as a result of internal conversion of habitable space. So that seems to be in conflict.
You can convert from a single-family dwelling, which is habitable space. You can convert a portion of the house. So that would be, I think, where that is, or what that is speaking to.
Yeah, E is only to
Okay.
multifamily, where F is to single-family residential.
Oh, thank you. E is
Yes.
multifamily.
Yes.
All right. Okay, great. Gotcha.
I think we should change that to habitable area. Under our new definition of habitable area on page 3, as defined by the most current adopted building code. And that covers Mr. List's concern. We don't have to add another definition of what conditioned space is. We could, but what we have before us tonight, we're adding a new definition of habitable area. So I just want to be consistent with definitions that we have in our own ordinance so that there's not confusion when we start to apply this.
And it would seem that since habitable area definition refers back to most current adopted building code,
Yes.
there's the nexus.
Right, so then as that may be changed, and then as John pointed out, contractors, people who are going to be building this, they have working knowledge of that, but they work from the building code. The public, people who, maybe want to convert, part of their dwelling unit, they might be working with this document, and the rest of the public is working with this document. So my point is just to make it the rest of the ordinance consistent with what we've already identified and defined at the beginning and in the earlier section. So, we've got a couple of changes on page 6 to consider, just to make it consistent with our definitions that we're proposing. I had a couple of other things. Let me get back to my original notes. That's on page.
That way it's consistent.
And I presume that all commissioners are in agreement that we need to be internally
We can,
consistent. Yeah.
we haven't opened this up for public
No,
comment.
we're
just
going
asking
to.
staff some
And I think the one
particulars.
thing
You're right.
that we would ask, I think, I'll speak for the rest of the commissioners unless they tell me not to, that we would ask staff to go back and make sure, just through a very, very careful review, that we don't have internal inconsistencies,
Exactly.
like this. So I think we're all agreed.
Staff
Other-
appreciates the getting into the weeds view of how, the terms that we use, because you're right, we say habitable area, but then we use habitable space.
Right.
We should be consistent throughout the document.
Exactly. This,
Absolutely.
it occasionally comes up and it causes confusion down the road. And when we are consistent using the definitions that we outlined at the beginning of the document within the rest of the ordinance. My next question is starts on page 12 of the attachment A under section 5, permitted uses on one family dwelling. This language has been lined out, section 6, 7, 9 to anyway. My concern is lining out, we're changing the use of the word guest house to guest quarters, but then lined out with this is lining out renting of not more than one room in a one-family dwelling. It's repeated again, like I said, in section 6, 7, I see 8, 9. That's the last time it shows up is under section 9. are we not allowing the renting of a single room in a house? I'm not sure what the implication of deleting renting of not more than one room. Could you shed some light on that?
The renting of not more than one room, if the commission recalls, that language was before you, and we modified all the residential zone districts to strike that out because it became a conflict in terms of tenancy. So, yes, we have no way of regulating somebody renting out a room to a long-term tenant.
So we're not
more than 30
prohibiting it.
days. We're not prohibiting it.
We're just not including that under this ordinance.
Yeah, that's probably something we missed under the term guest house. That should have been stricken if that's where it's located, because the Planning Commission did consider that language during the short-term rental ordinance, and it went to the City Council, and the City Council struck that from all sections of the code under, if it's a residential zone, about no more than renting one room. You can rent out two rooms. The city has no say. That was an archaic provision back when cities and counties used to regulate what constitutes a family, of a way of controlling numbers in a home. And so we don't have any ability to go into a house and say, are you related? Are you renting out to different people? You got a house, you got a four or five bedroom house, you got 4 or 5 people living in there, each have their own bedroom. We can't go in there and say, well, you can't do that because you're not family and you're renting more than one room. So that's what it was for. It was archaic, and it no longer exists. So to clean this up, it should be stricken.
Okay.
The reason why we're changing guest house to guest quarters is because we have an inordinate amount of folks out there that see that language. It's confusing. They say a house is a house is a house, and therefore you can build another house and it becomes either a short-term rental, an illegal short-term rental, or a legal dwelling unit. When a guest house is supposed to be, it could be attached or detached, it's just an extension of the house, so that if you have frequent visitors or frequent family members, it's just an extra room for them to stay. It is not a dwelling unit. And so we call it guest quarters as opposed to house, just to take the house out of it.
Mm-hmm. Under the definition of guest quarters, on page 3, it's written a quasi-habitable structure, and goes on to describe what guest quarters what constitutes guest quarters. I'm not comfortable with it. That kind of reads like jargon to me, quasi-habitable, especially as the rest of the definition lays out what constitutes guest quarters. And so I wanted to ask staff, I'm going to propose that we strike quasi-habitable from that, but can you give us a little more information why you said quasi-habitable?
Yeah, that's
again,
a good question.
I'm looking back at our established definition of habitable.
Yeah, based on earlier discussion of habitable, and I'll rely on Kristen to weigh in on this. It could be something we could strike out. I think we put it in there because, again, we don't want it to be. It is not really a house. It isn't something that somebody can rent out. And we've seen that in town where people have what used to be called a guest house, but it's a guest quarters, and they rent it out like it's a house. And we don't know, and it's not legal. You can't do that. If it doesn't have a kitchen, it's not a dwelling unit. And I think that's what we meant to say, but we can certainly strike that out.
Yeah, and I said the rest of the definition is very clear that that's what we are avoiding, we're prohibiting in the future. Okay, thank you. Those are all my questions right now.
Okay. Any other questions for staff by commissioners? All right. Seeing none, we'll go ahead and open up the item for public comment. If you have any comments you'd like to offer on this matter, please state your name for the record, please.
Good evening. Ryan Carter, City of Placerville. pardon my ignorance on this, but what is the situation on metering for ADUs and JADUs? Are they separately metered as far as PG&E and Placerville Water? And how does that work? Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening again. Thank you for having extensive questions and answers amongst yourself first. It really helps the public with what questions do I have or what can I set aside. You answered it, so thank you very much for that. So just one law, the California Government Code Section 65852.2, first sentence, and that's the one that's regulating ADUs that we're discussing. The very first sentence says, I'll have to paraphrase, but it says this jurisdiction may adopt an ordinance regulating ADUs. If it does adopt an ordinance, it shall, and then 8 pages of regulations that it shall follow. And I've changed my mind. I'm starting to think you should just adopt that entire code section as it is from the state. I went through it. I thought the state kind of contradicted itself in a couple lines, and the definitions were ones that we don't use. The habitable space, I mean, it has to be conditioned, 7'6" minimum ceiling. Bedrooms have to be a certain square footage. There's all kinds of parts of what becomes habitable space. And I don't see how you can get a final on if you turned a JDU out of non-habitable space and at the end you had 5-foot ceilings and no air conditioning. How can you be determined to be habitable at the end? So I do agree with using the definitions we have. Keep it simple as possible. I guess the city attorney will review this when it goes to city council, but it would have been nice if she was here to clarify anything. And then in 65852, it seems to mention that if an applicant must do, maybe staff can clarify this. It seems to read that an applicant must do an ADU and a JADU to gain certain benefits from the regulations. And I agree, quasi-habitable makes almost no sense to me at all. A JADU within the frame of the existing house can only add 150 square feet as an entrance. They can't blow out another 600 square feet off the side of it, I believe. And I would like you to do in your findings that due to extreme fire evacuations, new high density could pose a serious evacuation risk. And therefore you have a right to demand that the parking be on site and not blocking the roads when fire equipment are going one way and all the cars are going the other. So I think you have a right to do a finding in that. And I would also like you to do a finding, if it's in your will, that this ordinance is adopted under protest. You know, if you really don't like it, just put it on the record. We don't like being told, you know, this is our jurisdiction and the state keeps stealing from us. And I like the map with dots, half-mile dots around bus stops. Not just a bus line going through the town and then a half mile on each side of that going down the street. It's got to be a bus stop because that's the intention. The whole bathroom between the JADU and the existing house is weird. I could see where you could require like a Jack and Jill lockable from both sides style. But still, if you're in the JADU and you got to use the bathroom and somebody else has locked that door, you're out of luck. So I do agree that you need to clarify that. And then, you know, if somebody sues you over it, so what? Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Anyone else like to speak? State your name.
Good evening. My name is Cynthia Estes, and I live in the city of Placerville.
Cynthia, would you be kind enough to pull your microphone down just a little bit?
Am I too loud?
No? So we can see you.
Oh, Michael, you know what I look like.
Yeah.
Okay. I've been studying this for months, and I have one big question, and I'm sorry I was late, but since when do you get to something like this at 6:30 at night, man? I was figuring I had another hour. So my question is, my house on Locust is in a extremely high fire area, like probably everything in Placerville. Would that be something that would stop us getting approved for something like that, for an ADU?
Thank
Okay,
you.
that's one. The other one is the parking, as was just mentioned. I don't know anybody who has a whole heck of a lot of parking inside the city of Placerville. I can barely park in my driveway. So if I did something, if I did an ADU, there's just no way I would have to have parking on the street. So to make it so that people have to have parking on the street is going to take out a lot of people, I think. And I just wanted to thank you for addressing this, because I think it's really important for us, and especially as a small town, we may have different things than other people that we have to deal with. So thanks so much.
Thank you. Anybody else in the audience wish to speak on this item? Okay, seeing none, I'll close the hearing to the public and bring it back to the commission for additional discussion and direction to staff. I'll go ahead and start with just kind of a general comment. Well, perhaps with regards to the utilities that was asked, a JADU I don't think would have separate utilities. It's part of an existing structure. An ADU, something that's built, could be either way. I could see a sub-panel running off of an existing panel, 1 meter, or I could see a separate meter being added to the structure. So the law doesn't specify, and I think it'll be however the applicant decides to arrange that. Same thing for the water meter probably, and sewer connection as well. Again, the JADU won't matter because it's part of an existing structure. I do agree with, in general, the whole concept of looking at fire safety, and I think parking and density does become a real and legitimate consideration. And the law does give us wiggle room, discretion is the word. It does give us discretion with regards to public safety. I think the staff will need to work perhaps with the fire chief and look at, a survey may need to be done of areas of town where, okay, roads are substandard, there's no place for fire engines to turn around or even get through. You know, if we have parking on both sides, you know, my place here in Elm, there's some place where it's really, really tight with all the cars on the street. And a big engine, I think, could run into trouble, frankly. So I think that's a real consideration. And staff, because so much of this is ministerial, right? We'll never see it. Neighbors won't have an opportunity to say anything about it one way or the other. Staff will need to come up with objective criteria. That's the standard as laid out. Objective ministerial criteria that may result in some areas not being suitable for this, and similar to the parking public transit piece we talked about earlier. So I'll just kind of throw those out there as some general comments, and then we'll go from there.
Right. The parking is a concern, I think, for all of us and from the public, too. We appreciate your comments highlighting that. And I just want to ask staff if you would like to add to that. It seems, or maybe Chief Cordero, I don't know how often you survey or if complaints come in that triggers some sort of review. So let's just go ahead and go worst case scenario. ADUs, maybe several on a street are approved, and it becomes a problem, or there's a potential problem. How does staff see this playing out? Would you then modify the ordinance? Or again, this is, as Commissioner Friend pointed out, this would, by law, has to be ministerial. So how do we keep this from exacerbating a hazardous situation?
I'll just jump in real quick, and then maybe Chief Cordero can add. But basically, just taking a worst-case scenario, if we had an existing single-family dwelling on a street that was very narrow, either public or privately maintained, clearly you can't park on the street. There's only on-site parking, and they wanted to convert a garage or build a detached ADU that was going to consume on-site parking, then we would require that parking be made up on-site. I think we would have that ability, as Vice Chair Friend pointed out, that the city could make a finding and then deny them the ability to have that ADU unless they can provide on-site parking.
So it keeps everything at, again, objective standards, and it keeps it at the staff review level, and then the fire department. I mean, do you have the opportunity to kind of survey and say these are areas where we think would be hazardous to allow more on-street parking?
Good evening, and I think that through this process and the relationship between our Fire Prevention Bureau and city staff, a lot of these are going to be a case-by-case basis. We do know right off the bat some of the streets that are in the city that are very challenging for fire apparatus to navigate through on a good day, let alone if there's an emergency taking place. So, when those challenges come forward, working side by side with staff to identify that, on-street parking from a fire department perspective would really inhibit our ability to respond and evacuate areas. And we kind of know what those are right off the bat.
Questions? Commissioner List?
Just one comment on that very issue. If I live on XYZ Street and I'm not sure, is there a mechanism that we can use that would allow a homeowner to know up front, instead of hiring a draftsman or architect to do a set of plans for an ADU and get down the road spending money, and then all of a sudden hit this, you can't do this because of parking? Is there some way that we can, you see what I'm trying to do is the frustration of getting to that point. I have spent this money, now the city says I can't do it. Can we avoid that with some kind of something on the website? If you're thinking about doing an ADU, then please be aware that you may be in an area where parking off-site is not allowed. Please check with the city.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point, Commissioner List. Aside from, we hope in short order to create that map showing a half mile from bus stops, transit centers, that sort of thing. But as far as identifying streets where we could make a finding of a safety issue, that's going to be a lot more time. So I like your idea where we would provide for frequently asked questions or something like that that's on our website in regards to ADUs. We do have a section regarding ADUs, and we can put that right up front, encouraging that applicant seek the advice of our department if they're thinking about constructing an ADU or even a junior ADU. Well, typically a junior ADU, it's not going to consume any parking, but it will require another spot because somebody's going to drive to that junior ADU. That we just have information available on the website and direct them to speak to us before they spend that money designing the whole thing.
Kind of like our roosters.
Exactly, just like the roosters. Well, chickens, no roosters.
And on that point, Pierre, if somebody came to you and said, I'm thinking about doing this, it's where I live, And if you didn't know one way or the other, staff could go out there and look, right? I mean, that wouldn't be a problem. That much we could do. Okay.
Yes, staff is always helpful to assist the applicant any way we can, including site visits.
Other commissioners have comments? Commissioner Lepper?
Can I go through a couple of my other questions at this
Sure,
point?
of
Would it be
course.
appropriate? Okay. So I just noticed one small thing is throughout when we reference the 30-day limitation on rentals, some of them are 30 and some are 31, and I think that in general, unless there's a purpose for that, they should all be standardized to 30 days. Just some are like you can't rent for less than 30 days. Some are 31 days as referenced throughout the whole ordinance. So maybe just to find and replace, make them all 30 days to be standard.
Yeah, if I may, Commissioner List, it's 31 days or more.
Commissioner
31.
Lepper.
Because in the handbook, they
Right.
reference 30
Yeah,
days.
we need to make sure that that's consistent, because that's a legal term. It's
Yeah.
not something where we have wiggle room on.
Yeah, I thought it was 30 days in fact, I just opened literally to it, and it's 30 days in the, for longer than 30 days in the state handbook. And
Right.
there's 30 and 31 throughout our ordinance. So I just thought for clarity's sake, just not having that one day be a weird
Right.
difference
We
between.
can fix that.
Perfect,
yes.
yeah. And then we touched on the kitchen definition, so as long as you guys are comfortable with the reference points that people have for what is a kitchen within both the ADU and JADU, including a sink in the JADU definition, since it does lay out that you have to have certain appliances and, where is that? Certain appliances and food preparation. I think just throwing a sink in there for clarity's sake might not be a bad idea. Referencing the bathroom again on page 11 for the JADU, I do think we need to flesh that out because I think it is confusing. And I know if I was renting a place, I'd want clarity on when someone's coming in and out of your house, if that's the way you're going to go, and knowing that if you are going to go that way, you do have to offer bathroom facilities, because I know if I was in the JADU, I'd also want access to the bathroom facilities. So I think fleshing that out is really important to be clear, because that's an easier one for people to convert as well, and so maybe used more regularly. In G on page 11, we talk about that they may be rented independently of the primary dwelling. I wasn't sure if we should throw in once again there that one of the two has to be occupied by the owner. It's referenced earlier and everything, but I didn't know if we wanted to flesh that out there, that you can't sell it and also the owner needs to be in one of the two. And then finally on that one, on I there, penalties. I think we should add, just like in the ADU one, the line saying that the penalty for renting it improperly will be considered each day that it's not fixed, right? Because it strikes me as a one-time penalty when it's described in the JADU, but in the ADU, it references as, we're going to keep charging you until you fix it. So I just think making that one the same strictness as the ADU, for clarity's sake, would be good. I think that is the majority. Oh, and then just real quick on page 9, X penalties, actually what I just referenced, there's a hanging out parenthesis at the end there after underperformed that needs to be deleted. But that's the one I'm referencing for the JADU to be repeated under penalties. And those were just kind of my wording ones that I found, a lot of which we've touched upon. So thank you for entertaining me.
Thank you. And I think with staff's direction and concurrence to go through and make sure that we're internally consistent, I think a lot of the stuff will be corrected. Couple of comments I have. I appreciated Mr. Drovich's comments on the language, the actual language of the law, and I caught this as well, and I neglected to ask about it. But he's absolutely correct that the opening sentence says that the jurisdiction may adopt. And then, but if we do, then we have to follow the requirements as laid forth. So are you in a position to speak to that? I mean, are we compelled to do this, or do we have discretion as to whether or not we do? And if so, there must be a downside to not doing something. So
Well, it seems, I mean, we have these. If we're going to have accessory dwelling units, and we do, or junior accessory dwelling units, then we have to conform with state law. So I think that opening line, and you know, you may want to speak to council about this, but I would say the law opens up with that you may adopt these ordinances, or you may not allow. If you do not allow ADUs and or you don't have them, then you don't need to.
So the ADUs are different because the ADUs are granny flats, and granny flats are allowed by right already, right? So I think we can just push them off to the side, and correct me if I'm wrong, but ADU is now a new term for granny flat, which are already allowed, correct? I'm looking to staff for...
I guess it would be staff's preference that we continue to revise our ordinance that regulates accessory dwelling units and now junior accessory dwelling units within our own code.
And so that and in so doing, we realize that we become subject to this law.
We are anyway. We cannot preclude them. For example, we've been out of compliance with state law for quite some time. I think since either 2020, when some of the state legislation was approved, and in 2021, when a lot of the new legislation was passed. We have to comply with that anyway. So we created a chart that we provide to the public. It's on our website. Kristen can sort of show you what it looks like, and so it's pretty nice. We've revised it quite a bit, but it's a real helpful guide for the homeowner, for the property owner that is interested in doing an accessory dwelling under a JADU. But we created this in lieu of actually doing the revisions to our code, you know, coming to the Planning Commission and going to council and getting it amended. We're still going to have that quick reference because it's real useful. It's pictorial. It's really done in a column fashion that addresses setbacks and minimum size and all these different aspects of developing an ADU. But we do want it codified. That would be staff's recommendation. We wouldn't want to just, okay, we're just going to adopt what the state's doing. And then we got to revisit our existing code, eliminate that, and then not have anything really in regards to ADUs. But I think most cities and counties, I don't know of any that doesn't eventually adopt their own ordinances to regulate them.
So lesser of two evils, and we are compelled to do something, so we'll do it our way to the best of our ability within a little discretion that we have, rather than simply adopting what the state language is in its exact presentation.
I think that's a really good point because every city and county is unique. You know, there's no one size fits all. So this is the opportunity for us to take what's required by the state as best we can and fashion it for something that best fits our community.
There was another, I'm just kind of going through some of the comments in the open forum. Certainly if space is being converted, I guess we're talking about, what's our term, non-habitable? Is that what we agree to, non-habitable? If we're taking non-habitable space, making it habitable, then it has to conform to the ceiling, for example. I think you mentioned a 5-foot ceiling, but that wouldn't be, that's not code, right? So it has to have an 8-foot or whatever the minimum ceiling height is, right? So I guess the point is that when a conversion is being done, it has to meet all applicable building codes at that point.
That's absolutely correct.
Okay. So we won't have any substandard.
We will not.
Anything substandard.
Sorry,
go
if I
ahead.
may too.
Sure,
I think
sure.
height was referenced in that too, but there are height limitations on it, so I don't think it's a high-rise threatening situation.
Right, but I think it was the other way around, being
too small.
Too small,
yeah.
right?
So either way, it seems
And
like
there are minimum of square footage requirements, you know, for living spaces, I think. For example, you can't build a lot of the cabins you go and rent now. You can't build those. They won't allow you to build a 10 by 10 room, for example, even if you're just trying to build a tiny cabin out in the woods.
Right, that is correct, and this is just, you know, food for thought. But I remember there was a previous employee that was a building inspector with the city, and he calculated out if the very smallest dwelling that you could build in accordance with the California Building Code, and I forget, I'm trying to find it because He had it all calculated out based on the minimum for the bathroom, for the kitchen, for a living area, for eating area. And it was quite small. It came out to something like 220 or 250 square feet. That would be the very smallest, meeting all the applicable size requirements in the building code. But usually you're not going to see an actual dwelling unit built to that small. It'd be difficult to rent it out, I would think.
On the topic of dwelling unit, on page 2 of attachment A and the definition, we talk about structures, manufactured homes, or modular units placed on a foundation. Okay, and that is currently the definition. It seems to me that in the spirit of this whole thing about creating more affordable housing, and I've been a proponent of this in the past, and we've had concepts at least been discussed, if not formally, informally, with the whole tiny home concept, and I'm not asking staff to include it here, but I am going to ask staff to bring that concept to council for consideration, because I think in fact, I think out in the Caldor fire area, out in Grizzly Flat, there was people thinking about, can we get tiny homes out here that we could use for habitable space? And frankly, I'm in the camp that thinks they do have a place, and it seems like we've just automatically precluded them without consideration. And so I would request that staff would bring that back to council to see where council might be on that, and perhaps they could provide some direction to staff, and which might eventually come back to us. And I understand that there are possibly some challenges with existing law, like mobile homes are very specific and categorized. There's a very specific licensure or something. I can't remember what it is, Pierre, but I really think the whole tiny home concept should be revisited. So that's kind of an aside note on the dwelling unit.
Sure, staff can comment on that because staff has explored it quite a bit. There's been a lot of interest in tiny homes over the years, and so I think there's a difference between tiny home in terms of size versus tiny homes in terms of a type of RV product. And so staff is willing, and we would entertain any size as long as it meets the minimum requirements of the building code. So if somebody can come up with a 250 or smaller square foot detached dwelling unit and it meets the building code, they can build it. If they can find a manufactured home that meets, the HCD requirements and it's certified through HCD, then they can have that as a tiny home. Tiny meaning extremely small in size. But if you mean a tiny home where the RV industry it had come out with, say, instead of an Airstream, you have on a chassis what looks like from the outside kind of a house with a pitched roof and maybe some windows. But it's licensed by the Department of Motor Vehicles, and so we do not allow in the city of Placerville the use of an Airstream or an RV or a trailer as a dwelling unit, period. And we've already brought that with, up. We don't need to go to the city attorney for that, but we've had long discussions with the state on that. And the real exceptions that happens to those rules are in regards to mobile home parks. A lot of mobile home parks are authorized under a conditional use permit, and I've stayed in a few myself, and sometimes it's those mobile home parks that would then have the tiny homes that are within them, and they're a mobile home park where they're authorized under a conditional use permit, but we would not allow them on a single family home because they're not a dwelling unit. They are a type of RV that's licensed by the Department of Motor Vehicles.
It's interesting. I do support the suggestion of a finding for fire concerns or otherwise safety concerns, and I did write out some language. If we get, I assume we'll get to a motion, then I'll introduce it then. And then lastly, on the under protest, as I was sitting here, I was reminded of the great quote from an attorney, the defense attorney in the Scopes monkey trial back of 1923. And he said a bad law cannot be successfully administered. It can only destroy. And my feeling on this is this law will destroy, has a potential for destroying residential neighborhoods. I think the law of unintended consequences, it looks good on paper, but in practical application, it's terrible. I realize it has lofty goals of trying to solve a problem that we'd all like to see solved. This is not the way to do it. So I can't speak for council, but this commissioner says this is a bad law, and that's my feeling on it. Nonetheless, we have to develop a motion and make a recommendation to council. So other comments or suggestions for staff on this?
I'd like to hear what you have in mind for the fire safety. What I've done is create a list, and I would be happy to make the motion, but if you wouldn't mind
Sure, let me find it.
Bringing that forward,
Yeah.
then what I would do is make the motion with all the changes that we've discussed.
Sure.
And then we can further discuss,
here.
make sure we've covered everyone's concerns.
Yes.
So do you have...
Yeah, I'll just read what I wrote.
Okay, and you would like that added,
So this
like
would be a
at
finding.
the
This
end?
would be, so we recommend the city council find, that's on page 11, right of the staff report. So
Recommend,
then, and then before recommend, approve, so that would become 3. This finding would go in right after number 1.
So-
also find
Find that the draft text, okay.
Placerville is located in an area of extreme fire and other dangers, and boy, I was writing so fast. And will staff to adopt objective. Oh, and the council which compels staff to adopt objective measures to mitigate such hazards in a fair execution of the law. So I'm not strictly speaking to fire. I think we can have mudslide dangers. We can have all kinds. We have the trucks, the emergency response vehicles being able to get in. So this is a little bit broader than just the fire. But we live in our geography and our terrain and our vegetation puts us in a very severe danger. And so
Right.
staff is,
If
yeah.
I could just interrupt, Chief Cordero, help me with the term of Placerville is in a very high fire hazard. What is the CAL FIRE term? I want to make sure we get this
We're in
right.
a very high fire hazard severity zone defined
Very
by
high fire
Cal Fire.
hazard severity?
We adopted the current map. They haven't reached Placerville, right? I think what Chief Cordero is saying is Cal Fire they're currently working on revising the map for El Dorado County. They haven't gotten to the city of Placerville yet, but I
Oh,
will.
that hasn't been, we haven't been included yet in that.
We eventually will, but I will let you know that recently the city of Placerville did adopt by ordinance the existing very high fire hazard severity zone.
Severity zone, okay.
So we will re-adopt the new one whenever it comes
And
out.
could I
So,
add?
I-
Could I add, just came in my head, and I'll
Okay.
lose it. Could I add that we also have a preponderance of very narrow and substandard roads, which create difficulty in emergency response, right? Because that's part of the hazard.
And then what would that be to
So again,
standards to minimize hazards?
yeah, so our out with this law, one of the discussions we have, anything that deals with, I think, health and safety, we are allowed, ministerial, gets to the ministerial, staff can develop objective measures ministerially, and they can have a basis, if there's a basis in, say, for example, public safety and health and, whatever, they can make a determination as to whether or not an application is approved or not. I'm simply wanting to make sure that we make that finding that we have these situations in Placerville, notable issues with fire safety and substandard roads, right? And so that will compel staff to develop develop necessary objective mitigation measures in the appropriate execution of the law. That's what we're required to do.
But that puts the burden all on accessory dwelling units, as opposed to someone just building a house. If there's a vacant parcel on a narrow street that's impacted.
We have a law that is specifically addressing ADUs and JADUs. So these ordinance changes are dealing specifically with ADUs and JADUs. They're not dealing with new construction in general.
I understand that, but I don't think what you're proposing is fair, nor will it reduce will it improve our safety? My example was if there's a lot that is developed, and actually this has happened in my neighborhood. It wasn't a new development, but the new owners now have a plethora of cars. Before it was just 2 cars. And now so this is just, there's no accessory dwelling unit involved. And what's happened is that now, that property owner has impacted the safety of my street because they are parking numerous cars on, and I'm not an expert to say whether or not this is a safe or unsafe street, but it has, impact. I see what the problem that we've all identified is our very narrow streets being impacted by another car parked out there. But my point is, more cars being parked on the street isn't necessarily a function of an accessory dwelling unit. It could happen just by change of occupancy of a house with, it could just be 2 people who have, a ton of cars and they park them out on a narrow street. So why would we pick on the accessory dwelling unit occupant when what we're trying to do is make our streets safer? If your goal is safer streets and fewer cars parked on a narrow street, then we need to treat everyone safely, the same.
I don't see how we're picking on anyone. I think what we identified is the fact that we do, in fact, live in an area, for example, of high fire danger, right? And we have roads, for example, that are very difficult for fire trucks to access.
Oh, I'm well aware of those impacts and our current status. My concern is we are at a point where we need to promote housing and affordable housing, and that's what accessory dwelling units do. They cost less to. Well, hear me out, please. We're trying to provide housing for a wider range of economic levels, if you will. Your concern here is for our safety on our roads, and it's a good concern, it's a valid concern, but I don't want to impose a stricter standard on an accessory dwelling unit than what we are or what we're willing to impose on just a parcel owner who has, for whatever reason, impacted the safety of the road.
But that parcel owner, if
by
they want to
parking a lot of cars on the street.
That's immaterial. If a parcel owner, somebody wants to build a new house, the fire department is going to take a look at that and say, oh, well, you got to put in a place for a Y turn. Okay, so they'll make changes. They'll make that parcel.
But there's no prohibition. They can still park cars out on the road.
They can still park cars there. But that's immaterial to this. The fact of the matter is, we do have safety issues. And I want it in the record that we have these issues, and they may become part of the objective ministerial conditions that staff may apply. And I think that's totally appropriate. I don't think it's picking on anybody.
No, I
to
think
do
it's.
that.
I disagree.
Yeah,
I can't go along with that.
Vice Chair Friend, Commissioner Keeney, if I may, I hope this is helpful, but I think I know kind of what the situation is. So on that vacant lot, if somebody wanted to come in and build a single-family home, they're required by our code to provide for 2 parking spaces. They can be in tandem, but off-site, 2 parking spaces. So I think the difference here is the ADU is now providing for the ability to build yet another dwelling unit with more parking demand. And so I think where the commission is going is, do we have a way of assessing then if they're, because the state is saying, no, you can't provide parking unless you make, health and safety findings such as fire. If there's nowhere to park off-site, then we have the ability to require that they provide additional parking on-site, or we deny the ADU. I think that's what we're looking at doing. Am I correct?
Hopefully
that's helpful.
I never mentioned parking in my motion. I simply wanted acknowledgement of the fact that we live in a high fire and other hazard area, and that will compel staff to develop objective ministerial criteria in the review of ADUs and JADUs. That's all it's saying. It's simply an acknowledgement, okay? And I have faith that staff will develop objective criteria. I never mentioned parking in the language of the finding, okay? Never did. And I think it's factual. I think it's absolutely clear that we do live in this situation, and we should acknowledge it. And I don't see any harm in doing so. And I don't think it's penalizing anybody to do so, because it's factual.
Well, wouldn't that already be part of the ministerial review of the application? I mean, does staff see the necessity to make an additional finding on this, or can you clarify for us, the process of reviewing an application when it comes, to development services?
Sure. If somebody submits plans to construct an accessory dwelling unit or an ADU, we're going to look and see that it meets the minimum requirements of the building code. And of course, the state regulations have been reducing constraints to building an ADU. Say, for example, if you have a lot that's very tight, it's got a large home on it, and they want to build an ADU. Well, the way the state is saying is, if it's a 10-foot side yard setback or a 10 or 20-foot rear yard setback, we can only impose 4-foot setback. If they're converting a garage and the garage is a foot away from the property line, we can't prohibit that garage from being converted to an ADU. If somebody wants to, their only room is to build the structure in the front yard setback, well, that front yard setback can be 0. They can build right on the property line as long as we allow them to build up to 800 square feet. And so what you're saying is somehow we're going to develop some kind of criteria based on health and safety to either deny the ability to build that ADU or impose greater restrictions on it.
I'm merely saying, and I'll bring you in, Commissioner, I'm merely saying that we should acknowledge where we live and the concerns that we have where we live. That's all I'm saying. And you may come across a situation that we don't see at the moment. You may come across a situation where, we had this happen. We need to develop some type of criteria based on this particular scenario, whatever it was. This is simply a finding, and it's simply an acknowledgement of where we live and some of the challenges that we have. That's all it really is. And whether we do it or not doesn't change the fact that we live in an area with these hazards. But I think it's important still that we acknowledge it when we advance this. That's my position. Commissioner Lepper.
That was kind of what I was going to ask, I guess, because I see both of your points. But I guess my question to staff would be, would it be necessary or helpful for us to include that finding that does kind of give direction to staff to develop a set of standards that people could reference in the way that you've written it? Do we need to incorporate a finding like that, or do you think that our codes, our adoption of the statement that we live in a high severity fire area, do you think those cover us enough, or do you think a finding is helpful or necessary?
I actually think it is helpful, and maybe Chief Cordero can help me with this. The city recently adopted the 2020 2022, or is it 2023, the updated fire code. And so we took the fire code that was recommended by the El Dorado County Fire Protection District. And so part of amending the fire code requires the fire district to adopt a number of findings based on climate hazards, unique characteristics to us that may be different than some other county in the valley or somewhere else in the state. So I think that seems to be the direction you're going. And so we did that in the case of the fire district and then the city. We didn't really adopt it. What was the term that we used?
Ministerial consideration.
Well, we now rely on that fire code, and it's another term of art where we didn't actually adopt it because it was not by ordinance but by resolution. But essentially, the city acknowledged the findings that were made by the fire district are those findings that you're talking about, that we recognize that that this area is unique in terms of steep slopes, maybe unstable slopes, fire hazards, all those kinds of things.
And one other thing I would add is that we open this up to the public to have the public give us their feedback, and the public, the majority of the comments, it wasn't a large sample size, but the majority of comments focused on this. Okay, and I think this is a way for us to acknowledge what the people who took their time to come and speak to us this evening and say, hey, these are some of our concerns about this. Okay, it's a minor thing from my point of view. It doesn't really change anything, but I think it puts a finer point on it, it puts an emphasis, for lack of a better term. I don't think it's going to preclude an ADU or a JADU. It's not going to penalize anybody, but I think it puts a finer point on it, and it is consistent with all of the hazardous risk assessment, hazardous analysis that state and other jurisdictions are doing. So,
But then those fire codes that you just mentioned that were reviewed and adopted, that applies to across the city to any development, whether it's a single-family home or any
That is correct.
building.
That is correct.
So we have that on the books, and that would be something that you also would be considering or would refer to when you're reviewing an ADU or a JADU, right?
Well, it was those findings made that justified amending the fire code. So our fire code is a little bit different than, say, Amador counties. Maybe they made different changes, but they would have made similar findings based on unique characteristics. It's actually in the code, those findings that are to be made that allows the fire district then to modify the fire code. And then the city recognized those changes and adopted it by resolution.
here's my last and final statement on this. Staff is going to have objective ministerial criteria. The law requires them to have that. I don't know that they have that yet. They will probably have to develop that specific for this. Okay? This finding is simply saying that as part of that development, staff will consider the fact that we live in an area of high fire and other hazards. It's not, I understand your point about, we already have a lot of things in place, but they still have yet to develop. They have a lot of it already, but that doesn't mean it's completed. So
Is that true? A part of the
No, we
objective-
we don't have these objective standards.
But they,
they have to develop them.
We would have to develop
So
them.
this
Could you
would
read
be,
your language again one more
I
time
would
for me?
simply say that council finds that Placerville is located in an area of extreme fire, danger, and other hazards, which compels staff to adopt objective means, mitigation, objective measures to mitigate such hazards as part of the administration of this law.
I think that's not too strict, that says prohibit. I think mitigate is a good word
we're
in there.
mitigating.
Yeah. That kind of, I just threw down stuff, but I think that's it's vague enough to allow that, say, you're not allowed to do it because we live in a fire area, but that staff will have considerations related to that when doing ministerial review of applications. What do
I
you,
would strike the word compel. Is there another way we can say that?
Require?
fire danger and will,
Which,
could you read that part to me again?
yeah, fire and other dangers. I did fire and other hazards,
Or you could just say
which
the
requires
hazards
staff.
inherent in the community. Just say hazards inherent in our community.
See the violence inherent in the system. Help, being replaced. Inherent in the community, right? Okay. This is why I can't read my writing.
I'm trying to read it too.
Fire, danger, and hazards inherent in the community,
And
which requires staff to adopt objective measures to
develop.
mitigate.
Actually, to develop.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Very good. To develop.
Adopt.
Yeah. No, that's correct, because we're talking about they have to develop objective measures to mitigate such hazards
Yes.
in the
Objective standards, I think, is more consistent with
objective.
standards, not measures.
What is the law? The language of the law?
Talk about objective standards.
They say
for their
objective
Yeah,
Okay, that's fine.
I think in the handbook.
Or is it criteria?
I think standard.
Okay. Objective standards. Review standards. Right, so it's because it's a review of the application. Review standards. Review standards to mitigate such hazards in the fair execution, right, of the law.
Right. So,
If staff may, this is very, very broad, and I guess I would say we wouldn't be comfortable going then from here then directly to city council. I think we would take your direction, make the modifications that we feel reflect your direction, come back to you.
That's fine.
Before we go to
I'm
city
happy
council.
with that. So where does that leave? So this.
I'm ready to make a motion.
So right, we're going.
I have
Okay.
one
Let's
more.
go back through. Oh,
Can I ask one more just wording question that just keeps sticking out to me?
Yeah,
Can-
where are you at?
On page 1, on accessory structure, it says a structure that is accessory, incidental, and subordinate to the established principal, legal use, and for structure located on the same parcel. Does not make sense in my brain when it says and for structure located on the same parcel?
Structure that is accessory, incidental, and subordinate.
structure that is accessory and subordinate to the established
And for-
use
Oh, that doesn't-
for
yeah, I think
the
it's-
structure.
What is it meaning to say?
There's a syntax error.
Yeah, okay. I wasn't sure if it's just my brain not putting that together as a, like legal definition, or if there's just a wording error there.
Yeah, just in general, what's meant by accessory, incidental, and subordinate, say, we get this a lot. A property owner wants to build a garage, but there's no house on the property. A garage would be accessory, incidental, and subordinate to a single-family dwelling unit. And so you can't establish then such an accessory use without establishing the principal use on the property. And so that's why we meant to say establish the principal legal use and structure, I guess you could
It's
say
the word, right?
structure.
The for is really throwing
For
me off.
can come
Yeah,
out.
I get the other part.
Yeah.
The and for structure is throwing
Yeah,
me
just
off.
Legal use.
wheel, delete, for.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, we monkeyed with that too much.
I kind of figured it was like something got deleted and left in,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Yeah.
I had written that down and I just wanted to mention it.
Very
'cause
good catch.
it just popped out at me. Other than that, yes, I'm happy to.
All right, Commissioner Keeney.
Yes.
Ready to propose a motion?
I would like to make a motion. I had it all written down, and now I've lost it again. I finally got everything together, and then I forgot where I put it. Where is that page?
Take a moment. We have transition music.
Is it all the way over here? Here we go.
Like Jeopardy.
Yeah, right? Exactly like Jeopardy.
Okay, what page is it on?
11, I believe.
That's the one I'm
The
missing.
staff report?
Yes. Can I use yours?
Yes. Oh, you're going to make me find my page now, are you?
Back to this one.
Oh, yeah, here.
I would-
11 and then.
Commissioner Friend, I'd like to make a motion, following the staff recommendation on page 11, the staff report, that we adopt as part of the public record the January 17th, 2023 staff report for zone change 20-01, and recommend to the City Council the first finding as written, that regarding the text amendments to Title 10 of the City Code. We would like to add a second finding, which I'll turn over to you, Commissioner Friend, to read into the record. Our finding number 2 would be,
I need to refer to my notes.
now you have to look back on your piece of paper.
Find that Placerville is located in an area of extreme fire and other hazards, which requires staff to develop objective review standards to mitigate such hazards in the fair execution of the law. Fire, danger, and hazards inherent in the community, which will require staff to develop objective review standards to mitigate such hazards in the fair execution of the law.
Thank you. Changing existing number 2 to 3, following with the recommendation that the City Council approve ZC 20-01, and keeping the text as written on page 11, down to the last line, where we see Opportunity Zone HO of Title 10 as described in Attachment A, amended with the following. And I'm going to go through what I hope is the complete list of the changes. So as we go page by page, please feel free to speak up, and we can just amend my motion as need be. Starting on page 1, under accessory structure, I think we're going to delete the words and 4. Is that right?
I think just 4.
Just 4. Legal use and structure located on the same parcel?
Right.
Okay. That's page 1. On page 3, just delete the words quasi-habitable and continue with the definition of guest quarters as presented. A structure of permanent type of construction, and so on through the rest of the definition. On page 6 of attachment A.
Excuse me if I may.
Sure.
Did you want to change habitable area to habitable space on page 3 in the definition? You had talked about that earlier.
Yeah, we talked a lot about that, actually.
Where is that? On
The
page?
habitable space definition.
The definition is of habitable area.
Yes, I think the commission desired to have, for consistency, that be habitable space rather than area.
Change the word area to space.
Yes.
Which is also in the definition.
But keeping the definition as written? Okay. Thank you.
Yes, unless I'm trying to remember where Commissioner Lepper wanted to add the word sink, and I can't remember where.
Further on.
Okay, I want to put everything in there, including the kitchen sink.
Literally. All right, thanks. So that's everything on page 3. Moving to page 6. Under bullet point 2, last line, change non-livable space to non-habitable space.
Yes, that's
Then-
what staff has.
And I think this was Commissioner Friend, your comment under F2 on that same page.
No, I was corrected because
Okay,
it
well,
was multifamily.
leave that as
so
a
no
habitable
issue.
living space. Okay, leave
Yeah,
that
we had
as
no
written
issue.
and consistent with the definition. All right. My next change then isn't until page 11.
I don't know if you have this one in your upcoming, but on page 9, there's one of the 31 days versus the 30. Did you have that one?
Right, okay. And
that'll
change.
be throughout.
Is that the only one?
No, there's several. It flip-flops
Okay.
between on a couple different ones, and I think just picking one and sticking
So,
with, like I said, a little find and replace. would
Yeah,
do it well.
find and replace throughout the documents.
31 to 30.
That ADUs shall not be rented for a period of less than 30 days.
Yes.
Thank you.
And there's a parenthesis under X on penalties that needs to be deleted on page 9.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Then moving to page 11.
If I may, I'm sorry, I want to go back to the top of page 9. We were discussing the rental period. It's my understanding that when it becomes a long-term rental is 31 days or more. If you're less than 31 days, as it says there, that's a correct statement. If you make it 30 days, it'll be incorrect with the law on renting.
Totally fine. Yeah, just in the, like, on the next page on 11, there's another 31 reference, and I don't know, that doesn't reference short-term rentals, though. It just references transient occupancy, so I don't know. Again, just go through and review whether the 30 or 31 is the appropriate.
We'll make sure
totally.
it's the same. Yep,
Totally.
thank you.
I did just want to bring up on page 4 under section 3, did you guys want to address parking? I know we have to open that back up again, but there is language on page 4 that might want to be addressed.
I'm sorry, on page 4, under short-term rental?
Under section 3 on page 4, it says
E25.
0 parking stalls shall be required.
Okay.
But I don't think we need to change anything there, do we?
I don't think so.
No.
The only situation where I could see where, when we come back with these objective standards, that's one of the more prominent issues that at least I heard, and that would be where we have a substandard street, say, for example, and you can't park on the street, or then are we going to allow someone to create an ADU or a junior ADU without providing for on-site parking? We would make a finding of safety. If it's in a very high fire hazard severity zone, the street is substandard, then we're not going to allow them to have 0 stalls. They're going to have to provide for a number of stalls if the state allows us to do that.
I think that you spoke to that you would require them to find another on-site place to park. And if they couldn't do it, then they could be denied.
Correct.
Okay?
But would that require us to change this language to say 1, for example, stalls? Or would 0 be there, and then that would be under a ministerial review of appropriateness under our mitigation clause,
Got it. We got
if
to
you
go
will?
back and come back. We have to study it.
Staff will have to bring it back to you.
Okay, yeah, because you are making it conform to state law.
Correct.
With that
Yeah.
amendment to our existing, yeah. Well, in that instance, if there is just no, and perhaps this is going to result in us putting more signage out on our streets of where on-street parking is or is not allowed. If it doesn't function, then there's not the incentive to build the ADU. If you're creating an ADU, and the people, a person would come, well, where do I park my car? Well, you have to park it down at the park and ride lot. Well, that's a no-win, and I don't think that they would move forward with their application. But let's see what you come back with after your review.
Yes, sir.
We're in the middle of a...
What's that?
We're not having discussion. I thought this might come up. So we are still technically in the formulation of the motion.
Of the motion.
Everything is being added. It's all
Right.
motions.
Since we've been all over the document.
Right. I have something that I picked up on 11D, or G, excuse me.
Wait, page 11? Or?
Page 11.
Okay.
At the top, D, owner must occupy one of the units.
Yes.
Page 11 starts with E at the top, and you go down to G,
Oh, go down.
and we talked about the owner must occupy one of
One
the
of
units.
either units.
Under a G.
Under G.
You're talking about a junior ADU, right? Right?
Yes, that was one of my recommendations, that in prior areas of the document, it references that an owner must occupy either the primary or the JADU, and I think for clarification, we should insert it there as well.
Oh, gotcha,
For
yes.
reference in the ordinance there. And prior to that, I asked for a sink to be added to D as well on page 10.
Back on page 10?
D. Number 3?
Yeah, it could be 3, yeah. I just want to reference
Which
basically
includes all the
plumbing.
following. A sink.
So D3.
Working sink.
D3.
Yeah, D3, a working
Food
sink.
preparation counter, storage cabinets, 3 sink
Working sink, yeah.
Yeah, I think it could be
will
that
be
simple.
provided.
Make it a working
Why can't we
sink.
just comma that one in?
We can.
Food preparation counter, comma, sink.
Food preparation counter,
and
sink,
Storage cabinets.
and storage cabinets. That sounds great.
Okay, under 2.
Under 2.
Okay, then moving over to E, the sanitation, this was something that came up.
Oh, yeah, right.
And I was just going to change under E, the 2 words "may use a full bathroom inside" to the occupants must have
Access.
full access to a bathroom inside. Is that,
Has to
does
have-
that satisfy your concern?
Is have full access to a full bathroom.
Must have
So
full access
Full
to-
bathroom is important.
To a full bathroom.
Yeah.
Inside the remainder of the single-family dwelling. Does that,
Yeah.
So a JADU must include a full bathroom, or the
or
occupants.
the occupants must have,
full access to a full bathroom inside of the remain.
Playing the devil's advocate, I'm just wondering if reasonable accommodation allows for, we can never contemplate all the various arrangements that might exist. And this is kind of part of a rental thing too, right? So I'm going to create a space that I'm going to rent out, and then, here are the conditions, and I think reasonable accommodation allows for the landlord to work out with the tenant, here's how the bathroom situation's going to work, right? Because they have kids or they have an elderly, whatever. So reasonable accommodation, I think, covers.
The only reason I have a problem with reasonable accommodation is what's reasonable, because like my husband goes to work at 3 in the so he would need to shower
I
at
get
3
it.
a.m.
Right,
You know,
right. So in that situation, if you're the landlord, you say it looks like this, or if you're the tenant, you would say it looks like this, whatever. Because before they actually move in, here are the conditions, okay? And so, the reasonable accommodation, that language, if it ever got to be an issue, it's not going to be the city to enforce it. It's going to be, it's going to be a litigation between the tenant and the landlord in that case. So I think that language is broad enough. If you say full access, that kind of suggests uninhibited, unhindered, whatever. I know Pierre kind of mentioned, what if there's like an emergency? Well, reasonable accommodation would mean in case of emergency, they've got to have access to the bathroom, right? So, but 24/7 access, I don't know that while that's full, I don't know that that's necessarily reasonable. So I would think.
what's,
Go ahead.
what does staff think's closer to the state,
Intent?
the language that we're trying to conform?
Yeah, the
and,
state's intent is that to be a dwelling unit, they have to have access to a full bathroom, period. So
We
we
agree
will
with
put
full
that in,
access
there will
to a
be a
full
notice
bathroom.
of restriction placed on that, stating that, because they can't deny that occupant to the bathroom. Anytime.
yeah.
I don't care if it's 2 o'clock in the morning, somebody
kinda
has
feel
to
like
use
if
the
you're not gonna
bathroom,
put a
they have to
bathroom
use the
in it,
bathroom. They're
you're
not going
signing
to go
up for that.
outside in the backyard.
So the language as originally
I don't
written,
know what else to say.
What did we just
occupants
say?
may
Okay.
use a full bathroom. So that is adopted, that's in conformance with the state regulation.
Let me recommend access to, a JADU may include a full bathroom or the occupants have access to, okay, a full bathroom.
I would recommend a JADU must include a full bathroom, or the occupants must have access to
Yeah,
a full
must have-
bathroom inside
yeah.
the remainder of the single-family
Yeah, it
dwelling.
must have access. That
Yeah, okay.
That's fine.
Must have
access to.
Slight change?
Okay, so change it to must have access to a full bathroom inside the
Commissioner
remainder.
List has a he had a little bit of.
JDU must include access to a full bathroom.
Yeah, so then it doesn't matter whether it's in the JADU itself or in the house,
That's right.
right? Must have access to a full bathroom. That's even better.
Straight up.
Brilliant.
Okay. And just delete the whole or occupants, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Read it. It's the JADU occupant. Is that what it says? Because it's the JADU is the unit itself. The JADU occupant must have access.
Yeah, JADU occupants must have access to a full bathroom.
Okay.
I think that's reasonable.
Is that a reasonable accommodation?
I know
Is that-
I'd want full access to a
I'm
bathroom.
sure you-
Is that in conformance with the way you understand the state requirements? Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. Now,
So
moving
that's
down
me.
to under penalties, your concern was to make
I just want it to match.
I consistent with X.
Yes, that basically sums it up.
Is
on the
there any
prior
problem
page.
with that? Was there a reason that they were different, or is that just,
I think it's fine to add.
okay.
Yeah.
And that was the last one.
And your recommendation was to have the description of penalties for both be the same as written under X?
As written under X. Yes,
Okay.
correct.
All right. That's all I had for my motion.
There's a motion on the table. Is there a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion on the table and a second on the table. Is there any discussion on the motion? For those in the audience who have hung out this far, this is what the expression legislation is like sausage making. That's where it comes from. Okay.
And we make the best sausage.
We have good sausage.
do this
here.
every week.
Very good sausage.
With bathroom
All right. If there's no further discussion, I'll ask for a roll call vote, please.
Vice Chair Friend,
Aye.
Commissioner Keeney,
Aye.
Commissioner Lepper,
Aye.
Commissioner List.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. I would like to thank all of the members of the commission, and particularly my commissioner to my left, for the engagement, because I think it's really good to be able to just
Indeed.
continue to have the discussion.
Indeed.
I think
You
it's
know,
very
we,
healthy. Thank you.
yeah, Placerville is unique. You know, what we're looking at, and we've discussed, these are regulations coming down from the state to us, and so it may not be the best fit, so we're trying to make it work for our community. At the same time, we're trying to look in the future to make sure that we provide for all the opportunities for the folks who want to live here. And, yeah, thank you, too, Commissioner, all the commissioners.
Okay, then moving on to, I don't have my agenda in front of me. Thank you. My agenda, there we go. Oh, that's why it doesn't look like that. Number 11, continued items. We have no continued items. Item number 12, we have no new business. Item number 13, matters from commissioners and staff. Item from staff report.
I only have one item. Basically, we will be having a planning commission meeting at our first meeting in February. That's the February the 7th, and we will be bringing the CC&Rs, the conditions, covenants, and restrictions for Astoria subdivision.
Okay.
Estonia? Estonia.
Estonia. And so right now well, this will be the second meeting for the months, correct? So we're done with the month of January. All right, great. So
hard to
we're starting
believe.
off February. Okay, any other items from staff?
Anything, Kristen? I think we're good. Anything from the chief?
Items from commissioners? From the shamelessly self-promoting department, I would invite everyone to come to the local theater and opening night on the 27th. yours truly is Matthew Harrison Brady in the story Inherit the Wind, which is the Scopes Monkey Trial, and that's the reason I knew the quote. It wasn't obscure. So
Yes.
I wish I had that line. That's not my line. I happen to be the counselor for the prosecution, not the defense. But it's one of the few dramas that Imagination Theater does. So come out to cheer, jeer, or heckle, all at the same time. So if there's no other business, then we are adjourned. Thank you so much.